So we have Trump on the one hand calling the Ukraine conflict a kind of conflict between school children. Ursula von der Leyen, her pronouncement of sanctions during a press conference, had some choice words for Russia. Here's what she had to say.
We want peace for Ukraine. Despite weeks of diplomatic attempts, despite President Zelensky's offer of an unconditional ceasefire, Russia continues to bring death and destruction to Ukraine. Russia's goal is not peace, it is to impose the rule of might. Therefore, we are ramping up pressure on Russia because strength is the only language that Russia will understand.
Alastair, help us understand what is going on here with regard to this conflict, because on the one hand, we have Europe charging and pressing toward more escalations. We also have a very confused policy, seems, on the part of Donald Trump.
Well, let's leave aside the war party that we just heard, if you like, advocating for war against Russia and saying it's all one-sided and it's all Putin's fault. Because, you know, this is just the narrative of the Europeans, which reflects desperation, doesn't reflect any sense of thought within it. I think Trump's position is much more complex as we look at it. He has always said from the start of this campaign that he wanted to normalize relations with Russia. And why? He indicated that normalizing relations with Russia would actually contribute greatly to ending the forever wars. He hinted, and then Rubio took it up in some of the hearings. He talked about, if you like, spheres, that we were going back to the 19th century idea of a concert of sort of great states, and that would be the future. However, since then, what we have seen is, first of all, two things. One is this recent, attempted attack on the strategic aircraft bombers that provide Russia's strategic nuclear defense system. Now, people have laughed at them and say, but they were all set out on the runway, because that's what the START Treaty, which was signed between the United States and Russia, demands. It demands that the aircraft should be visible on the, if you like, at the airport, so that America can ascertain whether they are armed with conventional weapons or possibly nuclear weapons. And the same applies to the United States aircraft. And then we had, if you like, an attempt to attack all 5 of the strategic bases, though in three cases, it seems that whatever happened, the roof of the truck or the container in which the missiles were hidden didn't open, or the missiles misfired, or something went wrong. But so 3 of them were a flop, failed. But 2 succeeded, and there are extraordinary numbers sort of mooted around. But from my understanding and talking to people in Russia and talking and looking at the satellite photographs, although some of these satellite photographs look as if they've been messed around with artificial intelligence, but I would say probably between 5 and 7 aircraft were damaged, and even perhaps 3 were written off. But we don't know, and the Russians haven't given any real, if you like, detail on how many were damaged, but it was not significant. So we've had people call this a pinprick. That is grossly misleading, very misleading, because this is an attack, an attempted attack on, if you like, one part of a major nuclear power's triad, defensive, deterrent triad. And of course, the question that must be preoccupying Putin and the leadership is, yes, okay, it turned out to be what you call in America, I think, a nothing burger, largely. But what happened if it succeeded? What happened if they try again and succeed? it is not acceptable to lose most of your strategic bombers in this case. But secondly, and this is the other thing that is missing, is Putin must say to himself, yeah, but what's behind this? Are they probing our strategic bomber strength? Are they trying to find weaknesses in the defenses? Are they trying to find, the electronic systems or things that might be defending against these sources, so that we can think about coming back and destroying them more effectively? Because what we're talking about is the ability to prevent, on both sides, the START treaties are about preventing a first strike by an adversary, a first nuclear strike, overwhelming strike that prevents a retaliation in consequences. We're talking actually the most serious strategies that you can imagine. And a friend of ours, Larry Johnson, who I think you know, who is in Moscow, told me that he spoke to a Russian general. He was there, and last night spoke with this Russian general who used to be on the coordinating staff. And he said, look, we came as close to a nuclear exchange then as the time of the Cuban crisis. This was the closest we've been. Putin was furious. So don't listen. And Lavrov said this, and others said it. Don't listen to those people who are saying, oh, hey, we're playing it down. We're not playing it down. It's very serious. And I'm sure from what I hear from Moscow, that when Putin spoke with Trump, he didn't pull his punches. He was pretty direct. Now, Trump says he didn't know. Well, that's what Trump says. Whether Putin believes that or believes this is plausible deniability in operation, I can't tell you. But I can tell you he's furious. And the consequences of this is that the Russians are going full out now to finish off the conflict in Ukraine. What you've seen so far is just the beginnings. There's much more still to come on this. So if the idea in the team, even if Trump wasn't informed about it, was that somehow, and some of his advisors seem to have given that impression, Keith Kellogg, General Kellogg, it put out a tweet not so long ago saying, well, in my long experience as a general and a military man, I believe that, really audacious, innovative, special forces type strikes can change the paradigm and can force a different outcome. In other words, he was basically saying, well, it might have worked and it might have forced Putin to accept a ceasefire, which Putin has made clear to Witkoff and Lavrov has said endlessly, would only weaken Putin and would also, of course, trap Russia in a prolonged, unending war for the future, as the ceasefire would allow the West to rearm and to retrain the Ukrainians, and it would waste blood. I was in Russia about 10 days ago, a week ago, in St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg is the liberal capital, as you know, of Russia. But everyone there, and everyone, the Russians, all said, it's absolutely, the paradigm has changed. Everyone now understands clearly. We've spent blood on this. And if we have a deal now or a ceasefire, we know that that blood will have been wasted, because in 3 or 4 years' time, we're going to have to spend the blood a second time with our children. And this is not acceptable. And it's not just the liberals saying it, it is across the board. So when there used to be some pressure, if you like, on Putin, and people would say, well, why doesn't Putin, accelerate the attacks? Why doesn't he go further? All of that is gone because everyone there understands Putin gets it completely. He understands this. And what is more, he understands more about this. And he's really angry. And so are the Russian people. It's changed the mood there. When I was there 10 days ago, it has very much changed. So what we're seeing is a very important shift. If that was the plan, if it was the plan by Kellogg and the team to try and put pressure on Putin to accept a ceasefire, it has absolutely misfired. It has completely gone the opposite way. It has just stiffened the resolve not to trust Trump, not to trust America, not to be fooled into a ceasefire, but to complete the job.
Now, I don't know if you've seen all the reports in response to this, Alastair. There's a lot of reports in the Western mainstream media talking about what is to come. What will Russia do? They're reacting to, of course, what you just explained, the massive attacks in response on Kiev and various other areas of Ukraine by Russia through drones and missiles. But a lot of them say, well, Putin in Russia they don't have any real cards left, that actually Russia is cornered and backed against the wall, and the response has been soft. What do you say to this? And what's your understanding of what might be coming, given that you believe that this is going to escalate quite intensely?
I mean, this is the old canard that we've been told. Oh, Putin really doesn't have the he's been going soft. He's too liberal on this. And as I said, from being in the liberal capital of Russia, nobody's saying that today. There's full support for Putin, and they understand what he's doing now in this. He's not looking for a deal with Trump, quite the reverse. What he's doing is playing chess with that delicate US psyche that can suddenly explode and say, oh my God, this is 9/11, this is Pearl Harbor, this is, oh, woe is me, we must do something. So he knows that that is the case. And he also knows, and this has always been a concern of his, he has to manage this in a way, because, again, you've only got to go to St. Petersburg or anywhere else in Russia, and you realize, the demographic consequences of the Great Patriotic War. And how many, just in St. Petersburg alone, Leningrad at the time, under the siege, nearly 1 million, 800,000 to 1 million civilians died of starvation or of illness, or just simply were killed in this process. So there's a real sense of him of taking care of demography, of not wasting Russian lives on this. So it will not be a grand heroic charge of the Light Brigade into the forces of the opposition that ended up with all of the Light Brigade destroyed. No, he's not going to do that. He's going to do it systematically and carefully, and bring the ability of Ukraine to fight this conflict to an end. And then we will see what happens politically in terms of what will be arranged politically. And we'll see what the consequences are for the leadership in Kiev. The other thing I should just mention is that this is important because people have misunderstood it. What he's talked about the if you like, the terrorist element of it, but this is about a procedural change. They are in the process of changing the special operation to a counter-terrorist operation. The Chechen war is a counter-terrorist operation. The war, if you like, in Ukraine is essentially a special operation. What does it matter is that it puts a different framework on it and allows legally different reactions. For example, legally, it would be not permitted, if you like, to kill the leaders in Kiev under a special operation. But once they are defined as terrorists, then all that changes. So certain legal things which matter to Russia change with us. It's got to pass through the Duma, I believe, so it's still waiting to be passed, but it'll be passed, there's no doubt. And then it'll be in a different format. So that was the other thing that's happened. No, I think the people that say Putin soft or other, just don't know how much the Russians have suffered, not only in the Great Patriotic War, but have suffered much more recently. That's why they're so angry, because, during the 90s, with the Western attempt at what they call the Great Economic Shock Treatment, which, reduced people to absolute poverty, and the death mortality rates were skyrocketing. So were infant mortality rates. People were begging on the streets. People were selling their children. It was dire. This was imposed by, the Harvard boys in the 90s on Russia. And they came out of that. They pulled themselves out of communism. They pulled themselves through this. And then once they got out of that, they then found that the West has now started a new war against Russia. And they are furious with that. I mean, they just say, we can be rude too. You want to be rude to us? We will just be rude back at you. So there's a lot of anger there. And you have to understand it against that context. Just as they were getting back to normality, they're now facing a longer-term war.
Yeah, in your response, a so-called German intelligence recently came out with a report saying that Russia is going to not stop at Ukraine, as they've been saying this for a while, but that they'll send little green men, this was a direct quote from German intelligence, to places like Estonia to supposedly, as they kind of mockingly put it, liberate oppressed minorities there. What do you make of this, given your extensive understanding and experience in intelligence and working with intelligence?
I don't believe a word of it. That's the quick answer. I don't think they know what Putin is going to do. I just disbelieve all those people who claim to have, sources close to Putin, who tell British intelligence or German intelligence what the plans are, and pull the other leg. It's not real. It's not likely. As for the idea, little green men was a sort of contrivance that the West brought up for their narratives at the time of the Crimean incident. Look, I don't know what Putin is planning, but this is not going to be a sort of, if you like, a small asymmetrical war. He's going in for a proper war now, full-time counter-terrorist war. It's going to be serious, and he will pursue it. There's no suggestion, you widen it. I mean, it's the West that's trying to widen it. It's the West who's suggesting that Russia is going to attack Transnistria and perhaps take over in Moldavia. Well, the Russians have a base in Transnistria. They don't need to take over Moldavia. Where else are they going to go? To the Baltic republics? Why would they want the Baltic republics? If you look at the map, I mean, Russia's not short of land or space. They don't need Lebensraum, as the Germans call it, at all. They've got more than enough of that. So they're not threatening Europe. They're not threatening other states unless those states actively take part in threatening Russia. And it seems that some European states, Lavrov made that as allegation, that claim, 100% claim that he believed that Britain was involved in some of the acts of terrorism that took place last weekend. But there won't be a sort of out of the blue attacks on other neighboring states. His aim has always been, and I spoke often with Russians about it, there is a sort of strange reaction. I can understand it because I'm Irish and have lived in Ireland. And we have this strange ambivalence in Ireland between Protestants and Catholics and IRA and the British there. And it's been going on for a long time. Now, they have that in Ukraine too. But this, they don't see them as objects to be hated, to be destroyed and killed. They see them as something to be reconciled and brought together, that they are a deeply estranged family, deeply estranged. I don't know how possible it is, but I think one of the aims is to try and fold Ukraine back into some form of, the bigger vision of what it is to be Russia.
Vladimir Medinsky said this actually as well in a recent interview. He said those exact words that you put up, that it's almost like a fight between families, and the longer that this goes on, the more those divisions between Russians and those in Ukraine become. So maybe could you talk about the consequences? And you outlined that this war is moving toward a counter-terror operation for Russia. And what will be exactly the consequences for Ukraine in the short and into the long term? Because it seems that Europe is very committed to keeping this thing going. And the Trump administration, of course, has a lot of problems with balancing many priorities that I know you've talked about on other programs with this. For whatever reasons, there are many speculations about what reasons Trump has to want to pursue an end to this. But your take on this, on what the consequences will ultimately be?
Well, the consequences will be the defeat of Ukraine, and there will be some form of change of government that will take place there. In what way, I can't tell. It's too early to say. But there will be a change of government, and there will be an agreement that eventually will come about, which will establish neutrality and which will establish, if you like, rules of the ground about what military forces can be in Ukraine. So, I mean, this is very important in the sense that, this was missing from the American understanding of the ceasefire. They kept talking about it, in this Western liberal peace ideology, that here is Ukraine, here is Russia. Let's split the different, a few more oblasts this way, a few that way. This is how we find common ground. And what I say is, actually Russia is insisting on neutrality. Neutrality, is it a thing? I mean, can you divide it up? No, neutrality is a state of mind. I mean, the Swiss had the state of mind for a long time. And sovereignty. It's not something, a thing, an object that you can put out and place on a table. It's a state of mind. Those that are sovereign are those that feel themselves, see themselves to be sovereign. So how do you divide that up? How do you divide up, a little bit of neutrality for this way and a little bit of neutrality for that way, a little bit of sovereignty less for Russia here, a little bit more sovereign, where you've got really deep and irreconcilable conflicts. This sort of liberal peace ideology sometimes just doesn't work, and it has to be pursued further. So I think that's what we will see. It will end up with a defeat, and this, of course, poses a question. This poses a very important question about what is the true intent of Washington. Because a ceasefire on the lines that was proposed, the 21 points that Keith Kellogg, the strategist of Team Trump, presented. I mean, this strategy was intended, if you like, to freeze the conflict. It even said that, freezing the conflict was more important than making a political framework. So that, let's have the freezing first, and then you can talk about things afterwards. I think quite likely he'd taken this from the Korea example and had said, this is how we did it in Korea. We'd frozen it, and then they could talk about the future forever after. Well, actually, they still haven't reached an agreement on that. They're still talking about it. So it was for, pushing things to the never, never land. So I think the question that comes, and the question that's coming in Moscow, in the light of this failed operation against the Russian airfields and against the bridge and against the trains, all of that comes to the question, does Trump truly want to have a deal with Russia, a deal which means a relationship. And when Russia talks about a relationship, what that means is, on both sides, what you say, you mean, and what you do. And that has to work both ways. I mean, it's not trust, it's not the same thing. But when you say something, it means you mean it, you say it, and you will do it. And they don't know if that is the case with Trump. In fact, they're beginning to believe it may not be the case with President Trump. I don't know. I'm not trying to take a side on this thing. I'm just saying, the conduct by his team, the misreading of Russia that was done by his security team in their advocating pressure, more pressure, and pressure again on Putin, and that he'll cave and come into a frozen conflict, has actually had startlingly adverse and dangerous results. But it has also made them say, well, the question is, then Trump says things, but does he have the capability to do them, to implement them? Does he have the capability to improve relations, however incremental and slowly, with us? They must be asking these questions of themselves now. And they will look at the situation and they will see, first of all, that the Senate is holding the big, beautiful bill. That is the bill that is passing through the Senate, which both includes tax breaks and taxes on individuals and corporations, that this bill is being held up as a sort of hostage, with 81 of the senators saying, no, we want sanctions on Russia. We want to escalate. And we want to escalate in Iran too, by the way, because we don't accept any enrichment at all in Iran. So Trump must have known that, must have expected that. I mean, he has political feel, he has political intuition. So he's obviously sort of looked at that and thought about that. And what we don't see, and what Russia and Putin has said explicitly, I mean, not in the words I'm using exactly, but he's saying, we don't see any moves towards a relationship. Why not? Why doesn't Trump say it wouldn't be so difficult? We know from the New York Times, Biden issued, or someone issued a presidential finding instructing the CIA to pursue war deep into Russia. I mean, the New York Times explained all of that for us. So why doesn't Trump say either issue a new one or just say, look, that was the Biden administration. Who knows who signed it? Maybe it was AutoPen. Anyway, it's not legitimate. So the CIA is not allowed to continue on the old Biden administration track, but that's exactly what's happening. The deep state and the CIA are just continuing the status quo from the Biden administration. And so increasingly, I think, people, and I'm not saying Putin does, but people in that circle that I'm sure are asking and saying, so did Trump really actually intend to have a relationship, or was it just to fool us into coming into this trap of a frozen conflict that was being advocated by Kellogg and his team and Jack Keane and others? Pressure. Russia never changes until pressure is put on it. You have to put pressure on Russia before you'll get it to move. Put them into this trap, this framework trap, from which they will be stuck in a long-term repeating conflict with the United States, whilst Trump quietly pivots to China, pleasing everyone, pleasing the deep state, pleasing the Senate, pleasing most of the American public. Is that the real plan? But now, the most important thing is here, this sort of mistake erodes confidence. Not just confidence, not trust, not just confidence in Russia, China for sure, but it feeds across to Iran. Does anyone think that they haven't noticed, this and the attack? Do you think they haven't gone back and thought, didn't we have some containers that suddenly explode at Bandar Abbas port? I mean, I wonder if that was in any way connected with what we've seen of exploding containers next to airports in Russia. They must be, so people must be thinking, if this was a trap for Russia, what trap is it that they're setting for us in Iran? And China does its own calculation. As Trump says, they are tough to negotiate. But the point I would make about all this is it also feeds through to his great desire. His primary purpose as a president has been to, if you like, to balance, if you like, the great overhang of debt, which rests on a diminished and ever smaller real productive base on the United States. And it has become so unbalanced, like a sort of inverted pyramid of debt spread globally around the world, but dollar-denominated debt over a tiny and getting smaller productive base. And the aim has been always to harmonize this. And so, he has various means for doing it. Devaluing the dollar, also persuading NATO. This is very much like what you do if you're in an Article 11 bankruptcy in the United States. You pull in the creditors quickly, get them paying in, so that you can reduce your debt, get your balance sheet back into some sort. So come on, NATO, 5%, all of you, quickly, do it. So, I mean, this follows the sort of pattern of, how you rearrange creditors in a bankruptcy. But underlying that is the deeper thing of, I think tariffs and things were a sort of shock and awe to try and get people to start, committing to giving large sums of money or to buying American products or to transferring products to do this rebalancing. But as always, with currencies, with debt, confidence is everything. Lose the confidence of the rest of the world. When the rest of the world starts saying, well, is it really safe? Is America that safe? Does Trump really know what he's doing with us? Every day now in the debt market, in the bond market, as it's called there, every day it's a sort of nail-biting edge to see whether there'll be enough buyers, foreign buyers, to pick up the new tranche of American debt. And, Trump has got something like $5 trillion to refinance before the midterms. A lot of money at higher rates, and with higher rates, you're going to have other problems taking place in the economy. He needs a fix of the economy urgently. And if you like, it's not working. It hasn't been working with Russia. It hasn't been working with China. It's not working with Iran. And so, what's the psyche? What is the psychic sort of sense of investors? You're going to go on plowing your savings back into US treasuries, 10-year treasuries, or you say, well, I think we'll put at least some of them somewhere else just to be safe. Mm-hmm. So for last month was the first time on the capital account that it turned negative. There were more outflows than there were inflows into the US trade capital account.